Ciao friends, welcome to another video from SQL BI. In this video, we're talking about AI integration in Power BI. Specifically, we're focused on the Model Context Protocol, or MCP servers. This basically is a way to extend the capabilities of AI tools. So if you're using something like Claude Desktop or GitHub Copilot with VS Code, if you're using a MCP server, it allows you to interact with external information or external systems to be able to either improve the output of the AI tool or to actually take actions in these systems, which can affect the real world. Now, this includes Power BI and Fabric. You can use MCP servers for Power BI and Fabric already now to be able to read information from Power BI and Fabric, but also to make actions and create items and make changes to them from the AI tool. Now, we think that this is quite interesting and presents a lot of potential benefits, but also a lot of potential risks. So we want to walk through some examples of what this actually looks like, and then we're going to talk about what this all means, not just for us as data consumers when we're interacting with data, but also as Power BI developers. How might this change our way of working and developing when it comes to creating semantic models and reports? So let's take a look. Let's look at some MCP servers that we already have running on Power BI and Fabric. So what we're looking at here is Claude Desktop. This is basically the same thing as ChatGPT, but it's running on your local computer, and it runs on Windows and Mac. Now, the key difference is that you can only access the models from Anthropic, not from OpenAI or Google, another provider. It has the same various features, but it works very well with these MCP servers. You can basically integrate with a lot of services. Out of the box, you can do things like with Gmail, Calendar. You can connect to official servers from, for example, Microsoft to search their documentation. And you can also add your own ones that are official as well, like for PayPal, or custom MCP servers, like these ones, to be able to work with Power BI and Fabric. Now, what do these servers actually do? Well, let's start off with a simple demonstration. Search the Microsoft documentation for information about Power BI reports and scatter plots. So we've submitted this prompt, and normally we might expect the large language model to return information from its training data, but we see here that there's this little pop-up that appears. It's using a tool from the MCP server to retrieve information to provide a more useful output. Now, what's important to keep in mind is it's taking this information and it's removing it from its context, and we're also not getting any of the images. However, this can still be very useful for us if we need that information in a particular context, such as, for example, a chat where we're trying to do something in Power BI. So it gives us information about scatter charts, for example, like the scatter plot. So that's all well and fine. That's an official MCP server from Microsoft Docs. Now, what can we do with Power BI and Fabric itself? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you several different simple demonstrations. I'm going to show you one where we're asking a basic question about the number of things that are in a workspace. Then I'm going to look at a report. We're going to query a model, and then we're going to see if we can actually make changes. For example, whether we can enable or disable things, or actually even change a report. So let's start with the first one, where we just ask a simple question, like list the number of workspaces I have by capacity with a few bullet points. How can this application be able to answer questions about my Fabric tenant or my Power BI workspaces? Well, the reason why it's able to do this is because I have given it a custom MCP server that allows it to be able to see into my Fabric tenant and also take actions there. So I have a number of MCP servers, for example, to be able to do things with reports and models, as well as to be able to do things that are administrator activities, because I am an administrator in my own Fabric tenant. Now, it can use this server to be able to retrieve information, for example, to tell me how many workspaces I have, and then give me a breakdown by category, such as capacity. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that it's going to give us a slightly different summary each time, but it's still giving us the same answer in terms of what those workspaces are, what these capacities are. But due to the nature of the technology, it might summarize that slightly differently depending on our prompt. Now, what we could also do is in Claude, and this is one of the reasons why I'm giving this demonstration in Claude, we could actually ask it to create a graph of the data that it got. So this is another chart that I did earlier where I asked it to create a bar chart based on this information. And it can create an interactive bar chart, say what you want about the aesthetics, it's not amazing, but it's still quite impressive that it can just create this on the fly. Now, I'm not trying to say that this is amazing and it works every time, because it doesn't. For example, when I tried it earlier as well, I also had a failure where it just simply wasn't able to generate anything at all. So this is important to keep in mind. This isn't magic. This doesn't just work every single time. It still has considerations, limitations, errors, this kind of stuff. And it does require a certain amount of thinking and consideration, but also work to be able to set this kind of thing up. However, if you are using a MCP server of someone else, it's very easy to just get up and go and start to ask questions, for example, about a report. Now, I'm going to show you this example because I'm just trying to be concise in the interest of time, but this is an example when I asked it questions about a report. Check the SpaceParts report in the MCP test workspace and give me a summary of what the report is about and tell me if there's any issues. Now, even though I didn't give it the full workspace name, it was still able to look in those workspaces and find the correct name based on its implicit understanding of what I said. Next, it can actually list out the items to find the report that matches my description, and it can get a summary of that report and investigate each one of those pages in a relatively short amount of time to be able to give me a summary. Now, this kind of summary I've always found to be very verbose and not particularly helpful. Honestly, it's just quicker to look at it. But what you can do is you can again ask it to, for example, make an interactive wireframe of the layout. So in this case, if we select this, we can actually see that it creates a layout of the actual report, showing the different slicers, the table, and even giving us a legend for the various types, and then highlighting for us some of the issues that this report has. Now, it could be just making stuff up, but actually, when we check the report, we can see that this is pretty accurate. We have the cards in the top left, the trend, we have a bar chart, table, the slicers, all like this. Definitely not the best chart, definitely not the best report. But it gives us this nice wireframe overview. So it's quite impressive what it can actually read by just being able to look at, for example, a report and a model to be able to summarize what's there. Now, this doesn't just work on Windows. So again, I've just showed you now a summary of two very basic things. I showed you that you can get information about your workspaces, you can get information about a specific item in Fabric or in Power BI, and you can have, for example, visualizations and diagrams based off of this. But what about a model? Now, could I, for example, chat with my data that's in a semantic model, just like I can in Copilot, for example, a conversational BI experience? This is something that we've seen a lot of people talking about and a lot of vendors pushing for in the last year. That there's been a lot of tools coming out that allow you to be able to have a conversation in natural language with your data, which basically results in queries behind the scene. Can we do this from Claude Desktop? Yes, we can. Not just on Windows, but also on a Mac. So let's flip over to my Mac computer. And what we'll see here is that, just seeing that I'm recording, we will ask a question like, for example, go to my fitness model and tell me how many exercises there are per muscle group and which muscle group has the most exercises right now. So again, we're not telling it what workspace it needs to go to. We're not telling it the table names or the measure names. We haven't even set up really any preparation of the data for AI. We haven't even created any measures in this underlying semantic model. And what it's going to do is it's going to start to query it in order to answer these questions. So again, it's going to start by finding the workspace. It determines that there is a workspace which likely has this fitness model. It's able to find it by listing the workspace contents, which we can see here. And it's going to then open that model and it's going to explore its definition. It's going to look at the tables, it's going to look at the columns, the relationships. If there were measures and calculation groups and so on there, it would see those as well. And then based on this kind of reasoning flow, it's going to try to determine how it should actually query this data. So as you can see with these more complex questions, it's able to execute these tools one at a time, multiple tools after each other, even multiple queries, to be able to compile the result. And even if it creates a query that's going to result in an error, it's going to try again on its own to be able to get a result. So we see that, for example, here we have 118 exercises with biceps being the most. So we can have a natural language conversation with our data, and it can be able to provide us that information. But what is very, very interesting here is that we can combine this with other metadata or instructions or MCP servers. For example, I could give it an MCP server that has special information about fitness and weightlifting. I could give it specific instructions about that, just like how you can do in Copilot now with Prep for Your Data. And then it can give me a context-relevant analysis or interpretation of that result. So to summarize, what we can do with these tools is using natural language in an AI tool with a large language model, we can be able to read pretty much anything in our tenant, including workspaces, domains, capacities, even items and their metadata. We can also read data. We can query a semantic model, but also the underlying data sources like the data that's in a lakehouse, a data warehouse, and other data items. Basically, we can do anything that we can programmatically determine in these servers. And the key thing is that depending on how we're authenticating, it will respect our permissions. So it's not like we're able to use these servers to circumvent the existing permissions and access. We're just accessing it from our own user account in these examples. But in theory, you could set this up to use a service principal as well to help you with things like governance and administration. Now, all of these examples are just reading things. You're not making any changes. But where things really get interesting, and to be honest, a little bit hairy, is when you actually start to use these tools to make changes. Now, I'm going to show you an example of a full end-to-end workflow, very simple one, of where we're going to create a workspace, copy a report into that thing, and do some other stuff, like change the report, for example. So let's look at that flow. Let's just paste this in. I've pre-prepared it in the interest of time. We're actually going to resume a capacity that is paused. We're going to create a workspace called SQL BI, let's call it MCP. And then in that workspace, we're going to copy a report from another workspace, and then we're going to get a link to validate. So this is just the beginning. Let's see how this goes. Now, it's not expected that you would now use this as an alternative necessarily to using the user interface in Fabric and Power BI, but this is something that you can use in order to facilitate certain convenience or automation. So I'm going to just allow this once because I don't want it to resume my F64 and make me broke over a weekend. So, but this is something that in certain situations can make the whole process very streamlined, especially when you start combining it with other tools to be able to facilitate certain agentic processes, for example. So we can see it's already proceeding. It resumed the capacity, and now it's creating the workspace, and then it's going to try to find this report. So it needs to go through the workspaces, all this stuff. You see that it's using the existing tools that it has available, And in this case, it has over 110 of them in order to be able to find the necessary things that it needs to do, basically. So, all right. It now has the reports. It's going to copy the report over. And it's going to give me, hopefully, the link so that we can validate. So this is the link. Let's take a look. Open the link. And we're going to hopefully not get an error. Doesn't really matter if we do or don't. And this is our copied report, I believe. So it's going to take a little bit of a while to render for the first time. I'm going to let my cat in because she's scratching at the door. And so we copied our report. So we copied it into the new workspace that we created. You can see that it's a pro workspace, but we were still able to set this all up. So we don't have the little icon here. And if we go in the workspace settings, we can see that the license info is also going to be set to pro. So even though this is a pro workspace, we can still facilitate everything from our AI application. So let's continue with the workflow. What we want to do is, in this report, we have some formatting problems. Now, those who know me know very well that I absolutely love formatting Power BI reports. Of course, I'm being facetious. Certain tasks just take a lot of time and can be very tedious. For instance, if you need to take conditional formatting for a column and you need to apply it to another column, that can take a lot of time. Or if you need to replace certain fields, for instance, or if you want to, for example, change a color. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a replacement. We're going to change, for example, actuals month to date to, let's say, I don't know, actuals quarter to date or orders month to date or something like this. So let's make that change. And then let's also copy the conditional formatting from here to here. And let's also delete this card, I guess. So let's instruct the AI application to do these formatting changes for us. So let's say I want to make some changes to the report that you copied. One, copy the conditional formatting in the table from the percent to the actuals month to date column. After that, replace actuals month to date with orders month to date. Check the model definition of the space parts model in the Copilot F2 workspace for the proper field names. And after that, remove the KPI visual in the top left of the report. We'll put a big old pie chart there later. I don't want it to put the pie chart there. That's going to scare me. So let's go ahead and do these three changes and just see what it does. And this is going to be quite interesting to see if it's able to do this. We'll give it some additional instructions, just saying you're going to want to get the page definition for the copied report and the visual definition for the table to do these things. And let's see what happens. Let's see if it's successfully able to make these three changes to our report. So I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm not actually that optimistic that it's going to be able to do all three of these things at once, because the current state of these tools is that they are not remarkably robust, especially because I created them myself and I'm not exactly a developer. So, but the key thing here is this going to be a new way to create reports? It could be a way to be able to enhance productivity in certain circumstances. For example, copying conditional formatting from one column to another. That's not something that the user interface of Power BI currently enables, and it can be quite a pain point. I'm also talking about things like making the column widths of tables and matrices equal, or setting them to a specific pixel value. Those are things that work here, and I've tested that. Repositioning visuals, reordering them, setting interactions, managing bookmarks. a lot of these things that can just be incredibly painful. Looking for visual level filters, which can often be very deceiving when you get a report for the first time from someone else. So a lot of these things can really take a lot of your time and a lot of frustration. So that is part of the reason why this can be interesting. I do not think that it is an alternative or a new way to create reports, certainly not, but I think that it could be a type of external tool that you could use to support you in specific use cases. So why are we looking at all of these different scenarios? Well, it's not the point that these things are meant to like replace you or replace existing tools that you use today, but it's rather meant to augment you so that you have the option to be able to basically do more in a more convenient way, particularly if you can articulate that clearly in natural language and the tools become robust enough that you can feel reliable with them. It's always very important to keep in mind that there's still a lot of these, hiccups, let's say, of the underlying technology, but there's still quite a lot of interesting things that it can do, as we can see. So I'm just kind of rambling on while it's going through and doing these things. And another point that you might make is, well, by the time that you have been talking, you could have actually done this yourself in the report. And that's actually perfectly true. So these tools are not necessarily, at least in the current iteration and this one that I made, going to be more efficient or effective than the current way of doing it with the user interface. But you can imagine that over time, this is going to become more and more efficient and more interesting, particularly as you can scale it to be able to use multiple tools at the same time, or when you feel confident enough that it's going to work, that you can basically delegate to an AI to do certain formatting tasks that you don't like. And in the meantime, you could be working on the model, for example. So imagine a scenario where you change something in your model, like you change the name of a field, a measure, and then it breaks in the visuals. So you just tell, for example, Claude Desktop or VS Code, hey, can you rename all of these fields in the report? And then you continue working in the model and it goes ahead and does that. These kind of things are where it can be very interesting. So it's continuing to do its work. It looks like it feels confident enough that it succeeded. Whenever AI tools are very confident, I'm very skeptical. So it's giving us the link to the report, but I think we can just refresh it and see what happens. So moment of truth, we'll see. Okay, so we see right away that the visual has been removed. We have orders instead of actuals. We've copied the conditional formatting. However, we still do see that actuals month to date is present here. And we also have actuals here as well. And for some reason, order lines. But I'm going to be honest, I don't even remember if that was there in the first place. To be fair, this could have been a misinterpretation of our prompt, where it thought that we only wanted to do that in this table. But this is a good example of the kind of ambiguity and the kinds of, new issues you could have with these tools. Nonetheless, you can see that in the first try of doing this, that it was successful. Now, again, that's not going to say that it's going to be successful every time, because for every success that you're going to have, you're also very likely going to have hiccups and failures. And I think it's very important to keep in mind that when people give these kind of demonstrations, like the ones I'm giving now, they're often biased towards showing you things that work and less towards showing you the cases that don't. So I'll try to give you an example because it's important to keep this in mind. I tried to do this exact demonstration on a different report format, so with the PBIR format, and it struggled to do it, where it was able to find the report and it was able to figure out what it should do, but then it just struggled, and it even started searching its memory using these custom memory tools that I have and started searching the web. So it just basically spins its tires because it knows that it can't complete the task, because it has so many tools that it can actually see for itself and confirm that it completed the task, which is why, it either says it works and you feel confident, or it doesn't and it just spins its tires, right? So the point here is just that this isn't magic, again, right? It's going to work, but it's not going to work every single time. And it's going to depend on your context, it's going to depend on your prompt, and it's going to depend on the tools, how robust and quality they are, and what kinds of tools that you have available. So this is the wrong chat, my bad. So we're going to have to wait for the tool to respond. So, okay, so we've modified our report. So now let's clean up. So let's tell it, great, please delete the report, delete the workspace, and pause the capacity. And I'm pretty sure that I just made all the administrators watching this clench very tightly in seeing that I'm doing this. And indeed, you kind of should, because this is something that definitely needs to be, done very carefully, right? So, and here I think it's even having difficulties with trying to delete things. Oh no, it deleted the report. So, okay. Because there are people, if you're not paying attention, it could have destructive operations. So I have actually used this before in my testing, where I have a report called ugly report, and I asked it, why is the report ugly, and can you suggest things to do to fix it? And it suggested to delete the report. So it just deleted it, and then it recreated it in a different layout, which I'll be honest, was not much better. So there's a lot of risk for these things as well. And it's important to be able to understand and balance both the potential benefits and the interesting elements and useful elements, as well as the risks, right? So the benefits is that, of course, it's very interesting and cool to be seeing it go through this kind of autonomous reasoning workflow where we can read things, we can query data, we can take actions, but at the same time, it's all going to be about implicit interpretation of intent based off of what it sees in your prompt. So in the example I just gave you, maybe it does decide the best way to fix your report if you just say fix it is to delete it. And if you don't have version control or some way to back that up, I don't know, then you probably shouldn't have enabled the delete tool, I guess, right? I mean, I'm going to be honest, it's only a matter of time before someone accidentally sends their entire tenant into the void. But regardless, it doesn't mean that we should put all these tools and approaches on the sidelines, right? This clearly has a lot of potential and is very interesting. So what is this actually? Like, what is actually happening here? And how does this compare to like what we're doing in Copilot? So what I want to do is I first want to kind of stop for a minute and give a very high level overview of what this is, explain a little bit deeper, and then I want to pull it back a little bit and talk about this conversational BI, why this looks and feels different from what you're feeling in Copilot, and why that isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just a different thing. So let's take a look. So what we're going to do is, that we have, these various experiences in Copilot today. So we have creator experiences, for example, to generate DAX queries. Eventually we'll be able to generate TIMDL meta descriptions, report pages, or layouts at least, synonyms, as well as queries and steps in Dataflow's Gen 2, which is technically a part of Fabric. Now we also have consumer experiences for conversational BI, where you can talk to your data. You can chat with your data, talk in the Copilot pane, you can summarize reports, ask data questions, these kind of things. So a MCP server fits into both of these categories. But how exactly are we able to do this with our MCP servers? What are they actually doing? Well, MCP servers are basically, like I said, it's a way to extend the functionality of a large language model. So you, as the user, you are using these tools like Claude Desktop or VS Code to be able to interact with some kind of large language model. And you're using the chat interface. And if you're using Claude Desktop, for example, it's able to generate visuals and artifacts. And you also have the ability to set some, custom configuration and settings, depending on what tool you're using and how you're using it. Now, these tools, if they support the Model Context Protocol, can have MCP clients, which allows them via the Model Context Protocol to communicate with MCP servers. Now, MCP servers, what they are is, in a nutshell, they are a way for you to be able to integrate with other services. It has code that is executed when you use a tool, or it can also provide you prompts, which are kind of like templates prompts that can be used in certain circumstances, and resources, which can provide information to improve the outputs of the large language model. Now, these three things can be very useful and basically help you do more and get more useful outputs from that AI experience. And what's happening here when we're using Microsoft Fabric or Power BI is we're using the APIs from Microsoft, basically, to do these things. So if we're able to do something with the API, then we're able to have an MCP server on top of it, and we're able to work with it. Now, of course, there's a lot more to it than that. Just the standard wrapping the APIs, it's going to get you some interesting things, but it's not going to help you kind of deal with the specific scenarios. But the thing is that MCP servers are interesting not just when you have them for like one monolithic platform, but when you combine them with other things. For example, there are MCP servers that exist already that can let you interact with Power BI Desktop, your local file system, both on Windows and Mac, search the web. Most of these are already available out of the box in a lot of the LLMs. And you can also interface with various other types of external data and external systems to do things or get information, basically. So in a nutshell, that's what a MCP server is. So in this case, I have several MCP servers that I'm using for Fabric that are running on my local computer, but I also have a bunch of other MCP servers that either I made or other people made, or I'm using from companies like Microsoft or PayPal, which let me access other applications, other types of information, this kind of thing. And this allows me from one place, one application, to be able to get a lot of information, also from trusted sources, but also to be able to take actions in these different platforms, which is very cool. Now, what about this whole conversational BI experience? Because we were able to execute DAX queries to our semantic model. We can also talk to data in our lakehouse, for example, but this is quite different than what Copilot is doing today. Why is that? Well, today, when you're using conversational BI with Copilot, like it's very easy to kind of get started and just turn up the Copilot pane if you have the appropriate Fabric capacity. But typically how it works is you ask a question, and then Copilot will turn that into a query, in this case if you're querying the semantic model, and you'll get a result back which will be formatted in some kind of an output that consists of visuals, tables, and text. Now, what you can't do is you can't get other context, for example, from data outside of Fabric. You have very limited capabilities to be able to enrich it with additional information outside of what you can put in the Prep Your Data for AI. And you also can't control a lot of things like what model it's using, what tools it's using. You can't set up, custom ways of it interacting with other elements of even Fabric itself. So this is good in that it's simpler for you to get started, but at the same time, you still do need to invest a lot of effort in making sure your semantic model is really well prepared for the way they've configured Copilot to work and the way that it does work now. So basically, the better you set up your semantic model, the better it's going to work for AI in general, but especially for Copilot. Now, how is this different when we're using MCP servers, for example, from Claude Desktop? Well, here it's a bit of a different flow. We have a single question, but it's going to generate multiple queries to our semantic model, thus returning us multiple results. So in the example you saw where I'm analyzing my workout data, it generated 3 or 4 different queries, and it could also be potentially combining that from other contexts that I provided, from other MCP servers, from PDFs and documents that I provide, websites that it's referencing and retrieving information from. And I can also set certain configuration, not just for the application, but also for my user itself. And of course, depending on the application I'm using, I might also be able to configure the models. Now, all of this is interesting because we're not just getting a single answer, but we're getting answers in a context. And that is a context that we can set up and prune and basically engineer for ourselves to make sure that this is as useful as possible. Now, the last thing I'll point out here is that you can get basically any custom visual. And this becomes incredibly powerful when you combine it with MCP servers that enhance the visualization capabilities of, for example, your everyday analyst. And this is only going to grow over time, where you're going to be able to generate likely a lot of different kinds of visuals quite easily. Now, like I said, it doesn't mean that this is going to replace reports, certainly not. And the other thing is that setting all this up is quite technical and quite complicated. Like running a server on your local computer, it's definitely not something that for the average person is very easy if you're not from, like a technical background or whatever. So this requires extra setup, it requires extra effort, it requires extra time, but you have more flexibility, you have more customization, you can really tailor it to your needs in this case. And like I said, combining it with other MCP servers that work outside of your data context, not just for Fabric, but for other data platforms or products you might be using for other applications, for other business processes, that's when this can get really interesting. Now, with Copilot, on the other hand, you can just basically pick up and go. Of course, you still have to make sure your semantic model is set up, and that does take a lot of time and a lot of effort and testing, but you don't have to worry about these kind of configuration and stuff like this. You don't have to code anything for it to work. You don't have to worry about the security of the information being sent to the large language model. Everything is secure and inside of Microsoft's boundaries. So in this way, it might be a more enterprise-friendly, especially for business users, way of interrogating your data. Whereas here, it's really like this more advanced analyst kind of experience in essence. So conversational BI, I think it's something that is definitely very interesting, particularly when you look toward these more reasoning flows, and especially when you invest a lot of time and effort in making sure that the context, the planning, and the prompt is all put together really well. So that is everything that we have to say here. Overall, to summarize, what we've shown you is that MCP servers, the Model Context Protocol, is a way to extend the capabilities of large language models. It looks very interesting, potentially very useful. Already what you can do today is quite impressive, to be honest. But as much as there are benefits, there are also risks. And at the same time, we're still dealing with the same considerations, limitations, and caveats of the underlying technology. For example, non-determinism and hallucinations, these kind of things that we can mitigate quite a lot in certain circumstances, but we're certainly not going to be able to eliminate them entirely, at least not anytime soon, it seems. So regardless, like I said, the potential is really high, and the chances are that you will be able to benefit from these tools in some way, so it does make sense to start paying attention to them. Again, with respect to conversational BI, this is not going to replace reports, no matter how many times people shout this into a megaphone. You're still going to want to look at reports and dashboards to get a centralized overview of a situation. You're not going to want to have to ask the same question to an AI every day, especially when it can give you a slight variation of the same answer every time. But it definitely makes sense that you're going to potentially be using this to explore your data, particularly in these ambiguous problem spaces, like I said. Now, we're very likely going to start seeing a lot of these MCP servers popping up. Not just from third parties, from communities and individuals, but probably also from big vendors as well, and also from a lot of tools. And it's very likely that we'll start to see more and more tools starting to support these MCP servers as MCP clients. Now that's going to be interesting. That's all for now, I guess. Enjoy making reports and analyzing data.